Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everyone. We are Team 31, and we are going to be talking to you about leadership communication. My name is Elaine Dong, and I am joined by Jack Farley, Rich Neville, Tyler Klassen, and Victoria Hills. So 4 years ago, I was the captain of a dance team with over 200 active members, and I put on one of the biggest performances of the year. I did everything correctly up until that point. I managed my board, I filed paperwork on time, I sold out the show, but at the very end of the night, when my team handed me that microphone and asked me to give an impromptu speech, I fumbled. I simply couldn't put my thoughts into words, and I missed out on an incredible opportunity to bring the troop together and express my genuine gratitude. I learned a very valuable lesson that night, that all effective leaders must master communication. Poor communication within an organization can lead to low morale, missed performance goals, and sometimes lost sales. But effective communication can be used to rally a team, empower employees, build trust, and navigate critical transition points. And the good news is, you don't have to change your communication style overnight. In fact, today we're just going to be giving you 3 main tips to work into your everyday communication. Over time, we hope that these will become second nature and they'll really help boost your leadership abilities. So our 3 points are: 1, communicating deliberately; 2, communicating interpersonally; and 3, communicating by adding value. So for our first point, I'm going to hand it off to Jack.
So like Elaine said, all good leaders need to be able to communicate deliberately. And in order to do that, they need to use the 3 building blocks of clarity, specificity, and relevancy. I want to address each of these issues with a quick story. So before I came to Rice, I was working in the oil field. And my first day on the job, my boss was attempting to explain to me what my expectations were. He started, "You're a smart guy. You probably figured out what we're doing here, what's going on." Delved into some really technical oil field I didn't really understand. Finished off by a long tirade of the scope of our main responsibilities. Now, feeling very confident about the other part of the day, feeling like I can run around with my hands off. A main objective or goal as to what I was supposed to be doing, and assume that I had all the information I need or could figure it out on my own. As leaders, this is really important to make sure that you have a strong takeaway or main point for your audience to grasp. Next, my boss was overly specific and used language that I didn't understand. Now, you don't want to be on the flip side of this and use too vague or too general language in which your audience can't understand, can't get too specific of an idea of what you're trying to say, but you want to make sure you're striking a good balance there. And a good way to do that is to step into the shoes of your audience and see if what you're saying would make sense to them. Now, lastly, my boss was not relevant. He talked about information that wasn't pertaining to my specific job role, and what that did was it made me confused about how much emphasis to place on certain tasks. People only care about what's relevant to them. And by talking about irrelevant information, all you're doing is diluting your main message, which is something you definitely don't want to do. Now, take my boss as an example of what not to do, and make sure that when you're speaking, you're giving a clear, specific, and relevant message. Next, I'm going to hand it off to Rich, who's going to talk about interpersonal communication.
Thank you, Jack. That was a great lesson on deliberate communication, but I'm going to get into a different side of things. So I want to start off, if everybody could raise your hand if you've ever had a manager or supervisor come up to you and say, "We need to have a conversation." Now, keep your hands up if that conversation has ever turned into a lecture. Now, keep your hands up if you've ever been personally victimized by Regina George. Just kidding. But back to the lecture thing, right? We don't like that feeling. It's not a good practice and not a good feeling when you have poor interpersonal communication. So there's 3 ways to avoid that. The first is that you need to be considerate in your communication. The second point, you need to practice active listening. And the third point, You got to personalize interpersonal communication. So on the first point, considerate communication. Employees, which is who we're all going to be managing as future leaders, want to feel valued. They don't just want information. And that's why you need to not use accusatory language and be more appreciative. Then with active listening, what you need to do is show that you're listening if the communication is them coming to you, but also encourage them to practice active listening if you're conveying information to them. Because sometimes it's a difficult conversation when you need to tell them something. Sometimes you need to get information from them. But what you need to do is make sure that just because the information is one way, it's not a one-way conversation. And then finally, on the note of personalizing it, you need to start and end conversations with something not necessarily off topic, but just a softer introduction, whether it be the weather, that's always a popular one, or whether it be talking about the latest episode of The Mandalorian. That way, you don't dive into that, Joanna, we need to talk about your flair kind of situation. It adds a lot of value to build up that empathy with your employees. So I'm not the expert on adding value. That's Tyler. So I'm going to let him get into that side of things. Tyler, take it away.
Rich, thank you so much. My name is Tyler Clayson, and I want to talk to you today about communicating by adding value as a leader. Let's imagine for a second that you've just become the VP of Investor Relations for a Fortune 50 firm. You're on your very first quarterly earnings call. You have institutional investors from around the world. Goldman's there, Citibank, Vanguard, JP Morgan. They're hanging on your every word, waiting for you to deliver your value. What can you do in this situation to ensure that you add value through your communication? I'd like to propose 3 main ways to do that. 1 is repetition, 2 is the use of analogies, and 3 is preparation enough to go off script. Let's visit repetition first. Repetition is more than just reiterating or revisiting random pieces of information or data. Use smart repetition. Smart repetition is understanding your key points and main ideas that you want to drive home in your message and you want your audience to remember. Revisit and repeat these ideas and these points throughout your message. Second, let's look at analogies. Analogies are a great way to take very complex or broad ideas and bring them down and simplify them into 1 or 2 sentences, and to do that in such a way that a wide variety of audiences will understand what you mean and what you're trying to say. Third and finally, let's look at preparation enough to go off script. Let's revisit our example as the VP of Investor Relations. After you deliver your quarterly earnings script, it's time for questions. Institutional investors are now going to start bombarding you with questions, and you need to ensure as a leader that you're able to add value through your answers. How do you do that? The best way to do that is simply preparation. Understanding the intrinsic and inherent points of your message will help you to be agile and adapt to whatever questions or changes may come delivered to you by your audience. Ultimately, a message is worth nothing if it doesn't deliver its intended value. You can ensure that you deliver the value that you intend through repetition, the use of analogies, and preparation enough to go off script. And with that, I'll pass it over to Victoria.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you, team, for explaining all these wonderful communication methods to the audience. To be an effective communicator, as a speaker, you must use your written, verbal, and visual skills to convey a message that is deliberate, interpersonal, and of course, adds value. Serial entrepreneur Richard Branson was once quoted saying, "Communication is the most important skill any leader can possess." While this is true, I would take it a step further and say, to be successful as a leader, you must master the art of communication. Now more than ever, it is important to deliberately communicate a message which ensures those around you have clarity, specific direction, and understand the relevancy of a task. This framework, while not only creates a strong communication culture, but it positions any company to achieve operational success with their employees. For many of you, the techniques we discussed today may come off as easy. It may feel as if it's a gift, while there are others who may be in the audience wondering, how can I really have a conversation that adds value? Don't fret. You can master these communication skills by educating yourself and practicing. We want you all to become leaders who can rally a team, empower employees, and build trust. We want you to be able to navigate critical transition points in your future organizations. We want you to master the art of communication. Thank you.